Today's story takes us inside global tech, the most powerful company in the city. Two young men are about to face the most important interview of their lives. One has the perfect resume, but the other has something much rarer. Before we see who wins the position, I want to ask you, what is more important for success, skill or kindness? Share your opinion in the comments below. By the end of this video, you will realize that sometimes the person you ignore is the one who holds your future in their hands. The atmosphere in the waiting room was heavy with tension. Mark sat on the leather sofa, adjusting his silk tie. He was a top-tier graduate with a brilliant mind, but his heart was filled with arrogance. He kept looking at his diamond-encrusted watch, acting as if his time was more valuable than anyone else's. Across from him sat David. David didn't have a designer suit. His shoes were polished but old, and his bag was slightly worn at the edges. He was resilient, having worked 3 jobs to pay for his education. He sat quietly, reviewing his notes with a humble smile. Mark glanced at David and let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Do you really think you have a chance here?" Mark asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Look at you. This company only hires the elite. Your whole outfit probably costs less than my tie. You're wasting your time, kid." David looked up, his eyes calm and steady. He didn't get angry. He didn't argue. "Success isn't just about what you wear, sir," David replied softly. "It's about the value you bring." Mark just rolled his eyes and turned back to his phone, unaware that the real interview had already begun. Just as Mark was finished mocking David, an elderly janitor named Mr. Thomas entered the waiting room. He looked tired, his back slightly bent from years of hard work. As he pushed his trolley past the candidates, the wheel hit a small bump in the carpet. The trolley jerked, and a few drops of soapy water splashed onto Mark's pristine, expensive leather shoes. The silence in the room was shattered by Mark's sudden shout. He jumped up, his face turning red with fury. "Are you blind?" Mark screamed, pointing at his shoe. "Do you have any idea how much these cost? They are worth more than your entire year's salary, you clumsy old fool." Mr. Thomas stopped and looked down, his voice trembling as he apologized. "I am so sorry, young man. It was an accident. Let me get a cloth to—" "Don't touch me with your filthy hands," Mark interrupted, stepping back in disgust. "You people are the reason this world is so messy. You don't belong in a building like this. I'm going to make sure the manager fires you before I leave today." Mr. Thomas looked down at the floor, his shoulders sinking in humiliation. But then something unexpected happened. David stood up. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at Mr. Thomas. "It's all right, sir," David said gently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He knelt on the floor, right there in front of the most powerful office in the city, and began to wipe the water off the carpet. "Don't worry about the floor, and don't worry about the shoes. Accidents happen to the best of us. Are you okay? That trolley looks very heavy." Mark stood there stunned and disgusted. "What are you doing? You're getting your own clothes dirty for a janitor? You really are as pathetic as you look." David ignored him. He helped Mr. Thomas steady the trolley and stayed with him until the old man regained his composure. "Thank you, son," Mr. Thomas whispered, his eyes meeting David's. "You have a good heart, rare in a place like this." As Mr. Thomas slowly pushed his trolley out of the room, Mark sat back down, still grumbling about his ruined shoes. He felt like he had won. He felt superior. But David simply sat back down, his heart at peace, unaware that he had just passed the most difficult part of the interview.
"Mr. Mark and Mr. David," "The board is ready to see you now," the secretary said, her voice professional and cold. Mark stood up instantly, smoothing his suit. He gave David a final, prejudiced look. "Watch and learn, kid. This is where real power lives," he whispered, before marching into the room with his head held high. David followed silently, his face calm, carrying nothing but his worn leather bag and a heart full of humility. Inside, the boardroom was magnificent. A long marble table was surrounded by the most influential directors of global tech. However, the large leather chair at the head of the table was turned toward the window, hiding the CEO's face. "Please have a seat," one of the directors said. Mark immediately began his presentation. He spoke about his high grades, his expensive internships, and his vision for the company. "I am a winner," Mark declared. "I only associate with the best, and I believe global tech needs someone like me, someone who understands that in business there is no room for the weak." The directors remained silent. They didn't look at his resume. They looked at the back of the CEO's chair.
"And what about you, David?" a voice asked from the chair. It was a familiar voice, low, steady, and wise. David stood up. "I don't have a perfect resume, and I didn't graduate from an elite school, but I was taught that a company is only as strong as the respect it shows to every single person, from the top floor to the basement." Mark let out a small, quiet snort of laughter. "Respect? This is a billion-dollar business, not a charity." Suddenly, the large leather chair began to rotate. Mark leaned forward, ready to shake the hand of the powerful CEO, but as the chair fully turned, Mark's face turned pale, his jaw dropped, and he began to tremble. Sitting in the CEO's chair was the clumsy old man in the waiting room. He was no longer wearing the faded blue uniform. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His eyes, once tired, were now sharp and full of authority. It was Mr. Thomas, the founder and CEO of Global Tech. "You," Mark stammered, his voice shaking with fear, "you were the janitor." "I was a man in need of help," Mr. Thomas said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "I found that while one of you has a brilliant mind, the other has a brilliant soul. Mark, you looked at my clothes and saw a nobody. David looked at my struggle and saw a human being." Mr. Thomas stood up and walked toward them. The room felt incredibly small for Mark. "In this company, we build technology to serve people. How can you serve people if you do not even respect them? Mark, your interview ended the moment you stepped on that soapy floor. You didn't just fail a test, you failed as a leader." Mark stood frozen. The silence in the room was louder than his previous shouting. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly on the floor, the same shoes that had led to his downfall. He had all the degrees in the world, but he lacked the one thing that truly mattered: integrity. Mr. Thomas turned to David and placed a hand on his shoulder. "David," he said, his voice warm and genuine, "you didn't know who I was. You didn't know that helping me would get you a job. You helped me simply because you saw a fellow human being in need. That is the kind of leadership global tech needs. The position is yours." David's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I promise to work hard and keep that respect alive in this company." As the sun set behind the glass towers of the city, David walked out of the building. He didn't have a luxury car waiting for him, but he had something far more valuable. The lesson of today is simple. Your status can buy you a seat at the table, but only your character can keep you there. Money and titles are just temporary decorations. Character is the real currency of life.
To help you reach fluency, let's look at the key words and the grammar structure we used in this story. 1. Key vocabulary. Arrogant. Having an exaggerated sense of one's own importance. Mark was arrogant because of his degrees. Resilient. Able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. David was resilient despite his struggles. Contempt. The feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration or worthless. Integrity. The quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. 2. Grammar point. Degrees of comparison. In this story, we compared two different characters. Notice how we use these forms. Comparative. We use this to compare two people. Mark was wealthier than David. David was kinder than Mark. Superlative. We use this to show the highest degree. Mr. Thomas was the most powerful man in the room. Character is the most important trait.